Okay, so we started by cloning this repository here up on stungi-rsc on GitHub. It's the Beers on Rails repository, and it's the version of this app that has ActiveAdmin already installed in it. There's one little tweak that we need to make to the app, and we can make that together. I'm going to add the folder here. So I've already cloned it myself, and I put it in a folder called Beers with Images. The tweak that we need to make is in the DB folder, we need to update the seed script. The current seed script only created beers. We have since then added categories that are associated with beers, and so we can't create the beers without the categories. And so as it stands right now, what will I do? I'll add an admin user.destroy all. Otherwise, we'll get an error every time we run the creation of the admin user for ActiveAdmin. So I added that up on line 10. And then I'm going to wrap this creation of beers in another loop. I'm going to create 10 categories. Or no, I'll create 5 categories. Put another end here and indent that. And then I will create 10 beers per category. And then inside this first loop, I'm going to say category equals category.create. And a category just needs a name. And I'm going to go to Faker and get a beer style. So that will create 5 different categories, and then it's using that category that I'm going to create the beer. So I'm not going to go directly to the beer model anymore. I'm going to go to the category and go to its beers collection and create the new beers like that. So I'll say category.beers.create, and that's my updated script. So this should work. I'll need to run my migrations first because I just cloned this repository, so there won't be any database tables existing yet. And then I'll run the seed script. It'll create those 5 categories. It'll create 50 beers that are associated with those categories. And so we should see at the end here that it tells us that there are 50 beers in the database. And so I'm going to go into this folder. Make sure I got that up there. So these are the lines that I changed. And within here, I'm going to do a Rails DB migrate that will create all of the tables that I need. And then I'll run the seed script once this works. DB seed. And then I'm told that there are 50 beers in the database after running those 2 commands. It's these 2 commands right here. This means I should now be able to run the server and log into ActiveAdmin and see those categories and beers just to confirm that they're there. And so that means going to localhost 3000/admin. logging in with that admin@example.com, user with a password of password. If I look in categories, I see 5 different categories. And if I look in beers, I see different beers, and there should be 10 per category. So there's 10 stouts. Now it won't match the actual beers being generated because ActiveAdmin is not, or sorry, Faker's not smart enough to actually match the style to the beer, and that's fine. It gives us enough information. So looks like our changes to the seed script worked, and I've got the data that I need in there. And if I went back to the front end of the application, you can see the beers that are listed there, and the search should still work. So that was the seed script. Does anyone have any issues with this working or running? What's that? Oh yeah, we pulled this new from GitHub, and so that's why we have to run the db migrate, because there would be no the development database doesn't get added to the repo. Yeah. You'll have to run bundle install as well, and then you'll run db migrate, and then you'll run db seed. So yeah, we can also go to the app views folder and open up our beers subfolder and open up our beer partial, and we can within here, maybe underneath the beer name, print out that beers category. Oops, paragraph, category, beer.category.name is what we want to put there. And later on today, we're also going to edit this partial to add the images that we're going to add to the app. So we'll leave this partial open. But for now, this is what I've added right here. Paragraph displaying the word category and then echoing out the beer's associated category's name. Yeah, that'll already, just by way of the association, be there. And so if I do that, you can see the category being displayed for each of the beers. Oh, there's only certain instances where you need to restart the Rails server, and those tend to involve installing gems. Yeah, everything else, it'll just, it basically watches the files in development mode, and if they change, it reloads them automatically. And so it caches stuff where the file system hasn't recognized any changes, and if the file system does sort of register changes, Rails will sort of reload that. This is on, like, it's the server that does it. So the Rails server will go and detect changes to things, and it'll pull in the newer versions of those things. Okay, so I want to add images to my beers. Specifically, I would like a little image sort of below each one of these beers being displayed in the front end, and then in the back end, I'll open a separate tab for the back end. I'd like to, when I either create or edit an existing beer, I'd like there to be a section here for the image that will allow me to set the image. And initially, I'm going to set it just to a hard-coded string of a file name. That's sort of the cheap but effective way of getting an image into your app, but it has some limitations. So we'll do that sort of limited way of adding images first, and then we'll do it the proper way with a file upload gem. So the first way, I'm going to leave my server running, and I'm going to open up another terminal. And I guess I've got some changes here that I will commit here. I will say added category, added beer categories to script and beer partial. So I'm going to ask Rails to generate a migration for me, and I'm going to say add image to beers. And because I've written it in that format of add X to Y, Rails will assume that I'm meaning I want to add a image category to the beers table, and I just further have to tell Rails what image is, and it's going to be a string, or in the database that'll be a varchar. So Rails G migration, and then in camel case, add image to beers, space, image : string. That will write the migration for me, and then I will run that migration with a Rails DB migrate. So there's the line that I ran. Here's the migration file that was created. If we looked at that file, you would see it's got a add column to beers image string. So I should now be able to run it with a Rails DB migrate, and that will run this change to update my database. Looks like that worked. It successfully added the column to the beers table, column called image. There's a few other things I need to modify. I want to be able to set this column from active admin. So if you remember with active admin, we need to whitelist the columns that active admin can change. And so in my app admin folder, I want to open up the beers.rb. And I want to go to the end of that line and add in a comma, colon, image. So that means from active admin, I can set that image. No problem. And just to test that out, I will go to the active admin now and just see if I can set a string in that column for a particular beer and see if it saves. So again, this was the beers.rb inside of app admin. And if I go to a particular beer, so if I go to a beer, you can see there is now a new column. So active admin has now recognized that there is an image column. If I edit an existing beer and I just put in like testimage.png or really just anything, it's not a real image name. I just want to see if that works, if updating it actually functions. So I'll click update beer and it looks like it did. It stuck around there. If I edit it again, there it is, and I can remove it and update it. So that worked. So what we need now are some pictures of tasty beers. And so we will go to Unsplash. Unsplash is a really great site. If you don't know about it, it is free, nice photos, like stock imagery, but ones that you don't have to pay for. It's really nice stuff. The lead developer for Unsplash, or one of their main, it's a Rails app. Unsplash is a Rails application, and I believe his name is Aaron Clausen. He's one of the lead developers for Unsplash. He lives and works remotely from Winnipeg for Unsplash. It's a really great service. It has a really nice API. Yeah, and the photos on it are quite nice. So if I search for beer, I will get pictures of beer, and I'm going to download 4 of them. And to do that, you just click on the picture and then click the download free button. I've already downloaded 4, I believe, to my desktop. Let me see if I've got them there. Yeah, I've got 4 images. So pick any 4. we're eventually going to put them in the assets images folder. So grab 4 of them. And then with Windows Explorer, you're going to want to find your project and go to its app assets images folder. And you're going to want to copy those files or move them into there. So I just put all 4 of my downloaded images into my app assets images folder. So everything in the assets folder belongs to Rails's asset pipeline. So that's where we put highly cacheable things like JavaScript, style sheets, or images. And we've put, or at least I've put 4 images into the images subfolder. And then I'm going to go back to my active admin and I'm going to edit 4 of the beers. So I'll edit the first beer and I'm going to put the name of this image into there. And the extension. Yeah, make sure you grab the extension. So I will edit the top 4 beers and grab with F2, Control A, Control C, F2, yeah, change file name. Isn't that an awesome one? Yeah, F2, Control A, Control C. That should be a mantra. Learn a new shortcut every day. And then F2, Control A, Control C. Explorer, yeah, the Windows keys ones are quite powerful. Okay, so I've added all 4 of those to, it's not the first 4, this is showing these in sort of descending order by ID. And so if I want those to show up at the top of the front page of my website, I'm gonna have to change the controller slightly so that the controller also is going to be loading these things up in terms of ID and descending order. So to do that, inside of VS Code, it looks like I have a little bit of, I'm not going to add these to my Git repo because we're not going to keep them in there forever, but I will do this temporarily here. So I'll just say added column to table. I'm going to open up the app controllers folder and open up the beers controller. Because I want to change the order in which the beers are being loaded. Right now they're being ordered by price. I'll keep the order and I'll just remove that price symbol and I'll just replace it with the string ID descending. And so that way, the same 4 beers that appear at the top of my beer list in Active Admin, those same 4 beers should appear at the top of my homepage. You have to do it this way. So you write like the little snippet of the SQL string. Well, I won't say you have to. This is the way I know how to do it. There might be other Rails ways of doing it. And then in the partial here at the bottom, underneath the IBU, I'm going to add another paragraph tag. And for now, I'm just going to echo out the beer.image data so that we'll just see the names of the files below each IBU. So just like I was able to expose the beer name or the beer category name or the beer price, I can just say beer.image and that'll display the file name there. So back over on the website, you can see for the top 4 beers, there is a image file name. and then for the others there is not. This is one of those instances like I'm about to display an image, but I only want to display an image if there is an image present. And so I'm going to put a conditional in place where I say if beer.image is present, question mark, then display it. So present question mark is a little helper that you can use with any of your columns, and it basically will return true if there is data saved there. So it'll return false if it's nil, or if it's an empty string, like a blank string. I don't know, is that a thing? Like this? That's cool. Maybe that's the same thing. That's pretty nifty. And then in front of beer.image, I'm going to say, give me the image tag, not tab, tag. And so just like link tos that build our hrefs, an image tag will build an image with an scr attribute pointing to the proper location for that image. We can't actually path to that image directly. You cannot directly path to your app assets folder. It's not something that you can actually properly path to because it's part of Rails's asset pipeline. So Rails handles it separately. And so if I now reload this, we're going to get some giant images. Cold beer. So that's problematic. For now, we're going to solve this in a cheap way, which is not how you would want to solve this on a production website, which is just forcing the width to a certain pixel amount. Yeah, mobile performance would be a definite issue here. You definitely you never want to do this on a website because anyone hitting this website still has to download the full image, and some of these images are like 4 megs. And so if someone's coming on a mobile phone, not so nice. But it gets us to the point where we have smaller images here. So that was done right here. Well, and what we're going to do is when we add the image uploader, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can set up the image uploader to actually do resizing on upload. So you can have it resized to a whole bunch of different formats on upload, which is a nice thing to do. Yes. And so you can have it on upload, create like a thumbnail and like a medium and a large that you can use throughout your design. Any questions up to this point, or does anyone need to see any parts of my code that aren't up on the screen right now? Okay, if we viewed source, you can see what happens here when we bring in these assets. The asset pipeline is pathing to /assets, and then it's modified the name of the file. You can see here, it's the original name of the file, but then a really large hash of the file itself. Rails does this to allow, it does this also to all of our JavaScript and CSS assets. The Rails server will instruct browsers to like aggressively cache style sheets, script tags, and images, which is good. You want browsers to aggressively cache these things so you don't have to serve them up multiple times. The problem with aggressive caching of assets is if you update an asset, you then want the browser to actually update the asset. You don't want to grab the cached version. The nice thing about having a file hash automatically added to the path is if the asset changes, the hash will change, that'll bust the cache, and it'll download the latest version of the thing. And so it's a really nice way of handling this. Same thing is done with like modern JavaScript. So when you sort of compile JavaScript, or when you sort of prepare or build JavaScript assets, you'll often see like usually shorter, but you'll see hashes in the paths of those as well. And that's again for cache busting and for sort of aggressive caching. So that's what those are. That's why that exists there. No. And so if someone goes to download this, it'll download as that giant file name. It's going to change though, because we're about to remove these images out of our asset pipeline and allow them to be managed by, in our case, something called Carrierwave. And so Carrierwave is a third-party gem for Rails applications that allows file uploading. Rails also has a new thing that was added fairly recently called active storage. So historically, I was using a gem called Paperclip for uploading, and then I moved to Carrierwave, and it became one of those things that like almost every Rails app I was building was using some form of third-party gem for file uploads. And I think this was the case for a lot of people. So the Rails core team decided to take that and make it part of Rails, like that idea. And so they created active storage, which is part of Rails itself, and it allows for file uploading. I don't have enough experience with active storage to show you how to use it yet. There's extra marks on the project if you decide to use active storage instead of Carrierwave. They both effectively do the same thing, and they both allow you to either store your images to disk or to a cloud service like Amazon S3 or something similar. That becomes really important if you're going to be doing deploying to something like Heroku, because Heroku has like a semi-immutable file system. So you push your Rails app up to Heroku, it deploys it for you. If you then start uploading images to it, it looks like that it works. Temporarily, these images will be written to the Heroku file system, but Heroku will, every once in a while, flush your file system back to when it was just freshly pushed. So you can't trust Heroku's file system. It's not meant to be used in a read-write manner. It's meant to be seen as like an immutable file system. So if you want to support image uploads, your image uploads have to be sent to some form of cloud service. I typically use Amazon S3 just because that's what I have experience using. So you set up an Amazon Web Services account, you set up S3 buckets, which are just places to put files, and then you bind that S3 bucket to either Carrierwave or active storage, and so the images get uploaded, but they actually get persisted to the cloud rather than your file system. We're going to, in our example today, just use the file system. And we're also, in our example, just going to use Carrierwave instead of active storage. So to do that, we need to add Carrierwave to our gem file. And so I've got a few changes here that I'm going to commit to my project. Display your images. I'm going to open the gem file, and below where we added active admin and devise, I'm going to add Carrierwave as well. So that's Carrier and then WAVE. And then after adding it to the gem file, we have to bundle install it. I have an inconsistency on my system where I upgraded bundler, but it's at a different version of the bundler I used to create this project. So I have to use the bin stubs versions of bundler. So I will do /bin/bundle, and I will do install. And that just makes sure that it's using the version of bundler that this app was built with. And if we now look within here, we'll see Carrierwave and 2 other dependent gems were added to my system. Because I've added Carrierwave as a new gem, that means I need to restart my Rails server. So I will Control C on my Rails server and run it again. So one of the few things that requires a restart is the installation of gems. You'll get a class constant not found error message otherwise when you start trying to work with Carrierwave. So the server's restarted. I'm going to do a few things now. One, I'm going to take these images out of my app assets folder. So we're taking them out of the asset pipeline. I'm just putting them onto my desktop, and then I'm going to get them back into our app by way of actually uploading them to the application using ActiveAdmin. So my app assets images folder is now empty, and I've got those files on my desktop ready to be uploaded. And there's a few steps that I need to go through to get Carrierwave installed and attached to my Beers model. One is I need to run a command, which is Rails generate uploader, and I'm going to call the uploader image. And this is going to create a new folder in my app folder, and the folder is going to be called uploaders. So Rails generate uploader, so upload ER at the end of it, and then image. That created the app uploaders folder and an image uploader inside of it. So if I go and pull that file open, it's got a bunch of comments in it and a few things already set up. We will go through this in a little bit more detail in a bit, but for now we're just going to leave all the defaults. And I'm going to go into my models, and I'm going to link the uploader to the model. And again, we look to the docs here, and it tells us that we do that by a mount uploader statement. So I say here under my validations, I say mount uploader. We have to bind the uploader to a string column in our database table, and we just so happen to have a string column called image. So I'm mounting the uploader and I'm binding it to the image column that I was previously just using for like hard-coded image names. And then I mention the image uploader class name. So that's in this file. It's capital I image, capital U uploader. That goes here, image uploader. And that associates Carrierwave not only to this beer class, but specifically to the image column in the beer class. And now we're ready to do some uploading. And thankfully, ActiveAdmin is aware of these kind of third-party uploaders. So ActiveAdmin is aware of Paperclip, Carrierwave, maybe a few others. It should also be aware of Active Storage. And so just going to my ActiveAdmin, if I've got an image, maybe I need to restart the server one more time because I just created a new class. Let's just restart the server. That's better. So uninitialized constants errors are usually just an indication that you have to restart the server. Oh yeah, so it's tried to pull them in. Let's just temporarily take the mount uploader out and just remove those. You could also rerun your seed script. I commented out the mount uploader line, and I'm going to go into each one of those 4 and remove the image that we had hard-coded into there. So I no longer have any images in there. I will now uncomment the mount uploader. And now, either when I create a new beer, you can see there's a choose file, or when I edit an existing beer, there's a little file picker. So ActiveAdmin has realized, okay, this column is managed by Carrierwave. Instead of showing a input, I'm going to show a file picker. And now I can choose file, go into my desktop, and I can pick one of these images and actually have it be uploaded. So I can say open, update beer, and you can see now it's telling me that it has placed it in a uploads beer image 50 folder, same name of file. No longer part of the asset pipeline though, so it doesn't come with a hash on it and won't be as aggressively cached as images in the Rails asset pipeline. The 50 in the subfolder structure is because the beer I just attached this image to has a primary key of 50. And so now we can go to 3 of the other top beers and upload an image for each one of them. Choose file, I'll pick my next image, I'll open and I'll update, go back to beers, edit, pick the next file, choose file, and the last one. If we go and look in the root of the project, so this is my project root folder, the images were placed inside of this public folder. The public folder is where Rails serves up static assets that don't get any intervention through the asset pipeline or the Rails routing system. So you can put files in here that just get served up by Rails like static assets. They're not going to be going through the routing system at all. So this is where your robots.txt file goes, or your fave icons, 404 pages, etc. Really any static asset that you wanted to just have Rails serve up as if it was serving up, just a standard file over HTTP. There is an uploads folder inside of here, and you can see there's a beer folder inside of there, an image folder inside of there. That's the name of the column that we bound to. And then here you can see 4 different folders, one for each of the beers that I associated an image to, and that's where those images were uploaded to. I now need to go and do one final change, which is in my partial for a beer. I don't want the image tag to go to beer.image. I want it to go to beer.image.url. I'm going to leave the width 200 because we still don't have any resizing taking place, so these images will still be very large. And if I go back to the front end of my website, it should look like it did before. Each of the 4 top beers has an image associated with it. But if I view source, no, I want to view source, and I reload the view source, you can see that the SCR location is now pointing to that uploads folder, no longer to the assets folder. There we are. So there's not much more to file uploads other than what you might want to do is configure resizing. If we look in the image uploader here, you can see a few things. So one of them is like that location of where the image was saved, that can be changed. I usually just leave it as this default, but you can sort of see it's going into an uploads folder, and then it takes the models class and adds underscores to it if it needs to, the mounted column, and then the model ID. So you can configure a different path for where the files get stored to. If you wanted to start setting up like cloud-based storage, you would change here from storage from file over to fog, and that's what Carrierwave calls its cloud storage, and then you'd have to configure for the particular type of cloud storage you were using. I don't know what FOG stands for. It's probably an acronym where the F stands for file, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, we could probably look that up. What is FOG? FOG. Oh, FOG is another project that it leverages. FOG is the Ruby Cloud Service library. Oh, like a cloud? Like a cloud is like a bunch of fog that's solidified into a cloud. So maybe it's not an acronym. Maybe it's just FOG. Yeah, it's just fog, and fogs make clouds. So yeah, how would we go about doing image resizing? Well, there's a couple things. One is that you can define scaling processes. So here's like an uncomment, you could uncomment that. But what I typically do is you can create versions, and you can have versions, named versions. So here they're creating a version called thumb. Thumbed is not meaningful, it's just what it's going to be called. So I could also call it thumbnail. And you could say process on upload and resize to fit, and it will resize your image to either a width or a height of 50, depending if it's a landscape or a portrait mode image. And you could create a bunch of different versions. So you could say version thumbnail and how you want to resize that, and then version medium and version large. And on upload, it would create multiple versions of your file. It would leave the original alone. It would also create, one new image per version that you've defined here. It's not quite that simple though, because what you also need to do is, at the top here, you see a few lines where it references ImageMagic or ImageMagic. You'd have to do this, include Carrierwave ImageMagic. It is. In the gem file though, you'd also have to include the ImageMagic with a CK gem. And what ImageMagic does is it wraps the command line tool ImageMagic. So we're not going to get Ruby to do the image manipulation. Ruby's not going to sort of open these binary image files and actually manipulate them to create different sizes. It's going to defer that work to the command line tool ImageMagic, which is just a Unix tool for image resizing, which means that you need that tool installed. So you'd actually also, within your Windows system for Linux, you would have to do like an apt-get install of ImageMagic. Let's see if I can do that right now. Sudo apt-get, or let's see, sudo apt-cache search ImageMagic. Do you have one? Oh, there's a bunch. ImageMagic common. That's probably the one I want. Oh, here it is, straight up ImageMagic. So I can do a sudo apt-get install ImageMagic with a CK. So that was this line right here. Meanwhile, I do want to make sure in my gem file that I've got ImageMagic installed as a gem there, and it's mini_magic with a CK. And I do also want to make sure inside of my image uploader that I've uncommented the Carrierwave ImageMagic with a CK. Oh, look at that. Some things failed. I did a sudo apt-get update. Looks like this is now working.
Pretty good. What are the instruments though?
Both.
Yeah.
So that looks good. I'm gonna let it do its thing here. I guess meanwhile I could also be running my bundle install to get the gem. And that's to get the ImageMagic gem. So that worked. So that was a bundle install after adding mini_magic to my gem file. Looks like ImageMagic has downloaded in my Windows subsystem using apt-get, and I will restart the server here. And now, inside of here, because I've got the include happening, I am going to uncomment this resize, and I will set it up to resize to maximum 200. And maybe I'll make another size as well. I'll say medium, and I'll make medium like I don't know, 500. Let me test to see if this actually worked. So I will go to each of those beers and re-upload them, and it should resize them. So I'll grab this one, update, and if I go look in that associated folder, yeah, so there's the original image, which is, has yeah, it's a giant file. It's 1.3 megs. It's 3,000 by 4,000 pixels. Here is the medium, which is 375 by 500, and here is the thumbnail, which is 150 by 200. And so I can do this for each of those images that I've got in my system. I can go and re-upload them. There is a way of having Carrierwave revisit existing uploads, but it's not built in. Like you'd have to code that. I've seen students do it though. I've never had to do that myself. But yeah, it definitely can be done. The times that I've seen students have to do it is when they're pulling their images from an API. So they'll pull a whole bunch of images from an API, they'll be giant, and then they have gone through and like resized them automatically with Carrierwave. So now I can fix up that aspect of my partial, which was a hack at the time, which is this adding this width. And instead, what I can say is load up the thumbnail version of the image. Oh, that's neat. So like this dot thumbnail dot URL. Yeah, I like that better. And if I go back to the front end of my app, I mean, effectively it should look the same-ish. But these images, if I open them in a new tab, are actually the thumbnail versions, and they're small. And then I could set my partial up so that, you know, on the show page, it actually shows larger versions of them by adding in another, you know, maybe another local variable that determines, you know, what size to use or not. If I just change this to medium, though, we would see that it would load up the different sized image like that. Go back over here, put it back to thumbnail. Yay. And there's not too much more than that. As I said, there is some extra work to be done if you wanted that to be cloud hosted, which would be a requirement if you wanted this to be a production app running on Heroku, because you can't count on Heroku's file system. You would need to store those things to the cloud. But beyond that, our application is done. We've added images to it. Initially, we did so just by way of the asset pipeline, and we could just manually put images into the app asset images folder and then put their names as the image property for each one of the beers. And then we did it more properly with Carrierwave, adding those images. And then we did a little bit of resize work so that we can actually resize on upload. The other thing that you would likely want to do again on a production app is you would probably want to do some whitelisting in terms of the type of files that you're allowing to be uploaded onto your system. You don't really want to just give your users straight up write access to your file system. In here, you can set up like an extension whitelist. And so we could say, okay, well, we only want JPEGs, GIFs, and PNGs to be allowable. And so with that in place, if I went back to my system and I tried to upload something that was not a image, so like a PDF file here, you are now allowed to upload PDF files, and it gives me my allowed types. So that's nice. That's a little bit of security that you'd probably want to go on there. I think you can even go further and have it test MIME types for you, just in case like the extension whitelisting is not enough. So and that's all I got for you for today in terms of image uploads. So I'm going to stop this video here.